Yilu ratzonim refi v'hegyon libi lefanecha, Adonai tzuri v'goali. May the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. The poet writes that our angels spend much of their time sleeping. In their dreams, they tear down the new houses by the sea and build old ones in their place. No matter how long they may sleep, 100, 200 years, 10 centuries is not too much. The first to wake up takes the torch that has been handed down, adds a drop of oil to the lamp, and blesses the eternal light, and then recalls the name of every other angel. And one by one, as they are remembered, they wake up. For them, as for us, there is nothing more beautiful than memory. And to share some memories about Marshall, we first invite his brother, Ron.
Not sure how I'll get through this, but we'll start with this. He was my big brother. Because we were 5 years apart, we didn't connect very much until we were adults and married. But in the last 50 years or so, our relationship steadily grew closer. We felt we shared something unique. We and our uncle's son were the only Shapos in the country, as far as we knew. And our cousin didn't even recognize we existed, but that's a story you'll have to ask Ben and Jackie. There are two aspects of Marshall that I want to mention. The first is his work and his philosophy. He was a genuine scholar in the purest sense of the word. He enjoyed learning for its own sake and for the knowledge and ideas which he could use in his writings and his teaching. Our parents would have been extremely proud of all that he achieved. He was driven to achieve. And I'll never forget one philosophy expressed to me many years ago. He said, quote, "Being compulsive can be a good thing." He was a superb example of how that attitude can produce extraordinary results. One of his most enduring attributes was he set an unparalleled standard for excellence. I confess it could have been somewhat intimidating, 5 years younger, following him in the same schools, but I often tried to succeed in other ways to avoid comparisons. After all, you couldn't do better than getting all A's in every single class for 7 straight years of high school and college. The best you could do was a tie. And for someone who has a fairly strong competitive streak, a tie was not acceptable to me. What is most important to me about his standard of excellence is that it served as a guidepost to life. The second thing is his values and devotion. One of his most noteworthy values was a very strong sense of integrity. That was certainly one of the guideposts that governed his life. I talked briefly about his work, but the enjoyment and pride he derived from his work was matched, and in a very different way, maybe exceeded, by the enjoyment and pride he took from his wife, his children, and his grandchildren. His devotion to them was absolute. Here are a couple of very short stories. He was very sure of his intellect, but when Ben was in high school and would describe to Marshall what he was doing in physics or math, both sort of beyond me, so I'm not sure which, Marshall told me with obvious pride, "I can't even understand what he's saying." A huge concession from that great intellect. When Nat became a star in government at a very young age, Marshall seemed at once to be almost in awe and definitely very proud of all that Nat had already accomplished at that age. Without question, his pride in and respect for both of his sons only grew as the years went on. And when he would tell me about the grown-up conversations he had with his grandchildren. His cup truly runneth over, in the words of the song, as he described with evident pride their logical and thoughtful responses. And in my mind, maybe the best for last, Marshall was very proud of all that Helene had accomplished. But he probably got the greatest kick of all out of this story. Marilyn and I, my wife Marilyn, and I went to the University of Miami Law School graduation when they were celebrating the 50th anniversary class of graduates, of which I was one. After recognizing our class during the graduation ceremony, they had a special luncheon honoring us, and the dean went around to the tables asking who we were. When I mentioned my name, she said, expectantly, "Are you related to Helene Shapo?" When I called to tell him about it, Marshall got a huge kick out of it. He was feeling pleasure and pride in his family. Needless to say, Helene liked it too. Those are a few meaningful memories of his work, his philosophy, and his devotion to and pride in his family.
Thank you, Ron. We invite Ben to offer some words.
Yeah, thank you. So my dad was awfully good in front of a crowd and gave an incredible lecture, great lecturer in front of class, and now I see that it runs in the family. So staring out here, I kind of wonder if I should have brought some notes, but I'm going to do my best anyway. I think just about everybody here knows that he was on the Northwestern Law faculty for 40 plus years. And before that, he was at the University of Virginia. And probably some people know that, but I'm guessing not everybody. When we lived in Charlottesville, so I'm going to just preface by saying I'm going to just tell a few memories here. When we were in Charlottesville, we had the opportunity to go on vacations in the Southeast. So I remember one time when we went to the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee. I don't know if you guys remember this or not. Now it would have been probably 2 or 3, and that makes me 7 or 8. And so we're hiking in the mountains, and suddenly everybody's running down the mountain. And so we're wondering what's happening. So we look up and we see that in fact there's a large bear menacing us all. And now that was tiny. So, I was thinking, well, my dad being the young hotshot law professor, he's probably going to tell the bear that assault is a crime, or maybe that hurting people is a tort, and that could have serious legal consequences. But instead, he did the totally pragmatic and right thing to do, which is he took the tiny son, which was Nat, put him on his shoulders, and we charged down the mountain. This is for real. Mom, do you remember this? Nat probably couldn't remember this. And so anyways, you can see we lived to tell the tale, and so I just told it. So it kind of furthering the theme of thinking out of the box for my dad. We were in England when he was a visiting faculty member at one of the Oxford universities. I was 10, so that would be mid-70s. And the English, they drive their cars on the wrong side of the road. And not only that, the thing that everyone knows that, but what people don't always remember is that, the driver sits on the wrong side of the car. So we get in this car, and it's a stick shift, manual car, and this, the transmission is the stick is on the wrong side of the car because he's sitting in the right. And so there was a lot of trouble getting the car to start, and I asked my mom, why can't Dad just drive the car like he does at home? And she tells me, well, when you're driving, you'll understand. And I thought, I'll probably forget all about that. But then 15 years later, when I got my first car, because my parents gave me a car with a stick shift, a manual transmission, suddenly I got it. Like, wow, that's really hard. And I kind of related a little bit. Now, I'll mention that it took me probably a week to get good with my, transmission, changing gears and everything. And I was doing it on the correct side of the car, on the correct side of the road. But he jet lagged, managed to figure out how to do it within about 1 day. So yes, I did ask, like, why can't he drive this car? But within a day, he is shifting gears smooth as butter. So this is what I think my kids would say, the man had skills. So something that probably a lot of the people here can relate to better in terms of my dad's particular skills, I will never forget this, is that I was in grad school and my classes started after the Northwestern Law School academic calendar began, so I went up to visit my folks, and while I was at it, I went to his first torts lecture of the year, and apparently he had assigned homework reading to the students, and so at some point, pretty early in the lecture, he stopped and asked the students, who knows something from the reading, and if you guys can't understand my engineering stuff, I can't understand your law stuff, so I can't say what it was. But some student, or a whole bunch of students raise their hands, he picks one, and before you start, tell me your name. So the student says, I can't remember if it was his or her, the student says their name, and then he says, oh, you're the econ major from Penn State that plays lacrosse. And I thought to myself, wow, is he lucky that the student that he called on is someone he happens to know. But throughout the course of the lecture, that happened about 4 times, maybe 5, and he knew every single one of those students from their name. He knew where they were from, what they did, and their bio. I couldn't believe it. So I guess at that point I realized, well, it takes quite the intellect to ingest all the legal information that he would take in, and then the incredible memory that I had just witnessed, and then the ability to synthesize it into the course material that those students were studying, as well as his treatises and books, which, just like the engineering stuff that you guys might understand, I couldn't understand it, but wow. So this is an unbelievably talented man. And sort of to put a bow on that, about 5 years ago, I had the privilege to go with him to a recognition at the University of Miami where he had been a student, and there was a whole bunch of people at this kind of recognition event. And faculty members, alumni, and students all are recognizing his scholarship. And I was thinking to myself, this is just incredible, but these people only know the half of the complete person that he really is. So I just kind of wanted to let everybody know and share that with them, and turn the floor over to whoever's next. Now, yes, I will turn the floor over to my brother.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Rabbi Immerman, for everything the last few days, and it's wonderful. It was wonderful to see the Gordons here. Thank you for the last few days have been. I've really come to understand the meaning of family and friends, and I just want to thank everybody. So I kept telling Dad on his last night at the hospital that he was a great man and a great dad. The great man's part started with his accomplishments. Ron covered those, first in his class. When he was in high school, he was a champion debater and a clarinetist in the marching band, the editor of the school paper, and a host of a primitive 1950s TV sports quiz show in which some nepotism may or may not have been involved in his brother's extended championship run. And then in college, he was a serious journalist who wrote nationally regarded columns about race relations. I've read them, and they were ahead of their time. He had a master's in history from Harvard, and he taught that subject in college briefly. He found that law best suited his intellect. He became a true giant in torts, publishing a leading textbook, groundbreaking products liability treatise, countless other books and articles. But his scholarship always came second, really a distant second. Ben touched on it a minute ago, talking about how much effort he put into learning everything he could about his students. He never forgot his first obligation was teaching. and as Ron said, learning. It's everything to him. 50 years in, he prepared for every class like it was his first. I constantly ran into people at my firm, opposing counsel, strangers at conferences, random people at community events, neighbors, people everywhere, all the time, all who went out of their way to say what a pure teacher he had been to them. His Goldilocks lecture, Find All the Torts in the Children's Tale, was as ingenious as it was legendary. As was his rigor. I saw it starkly once when I was 11 or 12. He and Mom were judging moot court one evening. They brought us down to the law school to get dinner after. It was in the hallway. A woman came by. She was nervous, shaken up. She took down a cigarette, and about 2 drags, she started commiserating with her moot court partner, and she said something to the effect that Shapo was tenacious, I couldn't keep up. But his teaching came ahead of scholarship, family came ahead of even being a workaholic. He was married 64 years. When he gave speeches upon being honored on a landmark birthday or an award, most of what he would say was not about himself or his plaudits, but about his wife, and how she was the smartest and most capable Shapo on the faculty, and the most rigorous one in the family, which she felt compelled to demonstrate by correcting him on the spot, any errors in the delivery of his remarks. And to get the point of my remarks, the great dad part of the great man and great dad mantra, which I kept repeating to him, and which got me, if not him, through the other night. Dad was a committed father, very interested in every aspect of our lives. He was a light touch with me, not the type to give a lot of instruction, but rather to let me find my way, which is the correct approach. But there were key points when some prodding was required, when he found an understated but unmistakable way to let me know I should think about a different approach to what I was doing. I didn't need to inhale a cigarette after, but I'd get the point. The most vivid characteristic as a father, though, is how proud he was of us. Anything Ben or I would do, even if comically unremarkable, would be something to brag about. He had a lot to brag about with Ben. The learning part of his personality just was absorbed with, he could have a son to get a PhD in engineering, and something else about him was, he was a little boy during the war, and he was always very patriotic, and Ben was working on designing things to protect our country as an engineer was something he was very proud of. His pride was sincere, unvarnished, and without any pretense. I'll give 2 examples and then finish. One was in high school. I'm not sure of every detail. I think maybe junior year, regional wrestling tournament. I lost in the semis on Saturday morning in a big match, which probably ended our shot at the team title. I fell for the exact same sucker move at the buzzer that my opponent had beaten me with in the earlier dual meet. We had a coach who wasn't just from the old school, but who ran the old school. Think Bob Knight without the felonies, maybe. And he was unhappy, to say the least. Fast forward to Saturday night, the placement matches, I did come back to take 3rd and qualify for sectionals, but we both knew that wasn't where I should have finished. So anyway, after the last matches, since it was a smaller group still wrestling, in the final matches, instead of taking the whole team back to the high school and dropping us off to get home on our own, he just drove the handful of us that were left straight to our homes. You could figure out what order he'd be taking us based on the first turn once he got to Evanston. And that night, the direction he started meant he'd be dropping me off last. So I did some quick, panicked calculating and realized that looming at the end of the ride was going to be about 10 minutes alone with him and with who knew what kind of yelling. Surprisingly, though, as he started driving that last leg, instead of chewing me out, he said very quietly, "That was sure some proud dad he saw up in the stands." When I got my hand raised after the 3rd place match. I never forgot how that had made an impression on such a hardened, tough guy from the old school. The other example was about 2001 or 2. I'm insurance director. I'm walking through the Capitol to a hearing. State senator I knew pretty well shouted at me to come over. He told me he'd met my dad at an event at Northwestern and how Dad wouldn't shut up about how proud he was of me. Senator had a unique gift of speech and humor, and after saying that about how proud Dad was of me, he added, it was kind of nauseating, actually. And he chuckled. But there was a pause before he said actually, and a little but an unmistakable flash in his eye. And I saw that he was only half kidding, and that the chuckle was a little performative, and that it was in truth a sore spot for him, because he'd actually and somewhat famously published a book about his absent father and the resulting void in his life. So 6 or 7 years later, when I saw the same former state senator, now in Washington, D.C., taking the oath of office to be president, a man from Chicago, now a man in full on the world's biggest stage, I thought about that conversation, and I reflected that what had made me my best self was something even a president, someone who had reached the pinnacle of this mortal world, knows that can never be replicated. That was the earnest love of a committed father whose memory will always be my treasured blessing.
My parents asked me over last week if I want to see my grandpa in the hospital. They said it was my choice, and I said no. For the last 3 years, I've seen my grandpa bedridden in a shell of once who he was. He was diagnosed with Parkinsonism, and it slowly destroyed the person who would work out every day in the same gray New Balances. I didn't want what was going on in the hospital to be the lasting memory I would have of my grandfather, Marshall Shapo. I wanted my lasting memories of my grandfather to be of the first 14 years of my life. That was who Marshall Shapo was to me. He was a small, older man who would come to my house every Friday night and celebrate Shabbat with us. He would sit in the same spot every Friday evening in the dining room and would always give his lessons in baseball and law history. My younger self would ignore the law and real-world lessons, but as I've matured, I've grown to appreciate those hypothetical Mr. A and Mr. B questions that are way deeper and meaningful than what an 8-year-old me could comprehend. Marshall Shapo was someone whose impact on society was bigger than what my younger self could realize. Constantly throughout my life, as my dad said, I've had people come up to me and ask if I was related to Marshall Shapo, because they had him as a law professor at Northwestern University. They would always get so excited when I said yes, and a lot of people would channel their inner fanboy about Grandpa Marsh, like Swifties do when they talk about Taylor Swift. To me, the person his ex-students would get all excited about was a man who had the similar vulgar sense of humor as I do, the man who took notes on whatever on his little piece of paper he would put in his pocket of his collared shirt, and the guy who would go to all my Little League games and sit in his long chair and keep score on those same little pieces of paper. I still have some of those score sheets with me to this day. That's who Marshall Shapo was to me, and he was a pretty cool dude, and he was truly that rock star everyone told me he once was.
Helene and Ron, Nat and Ben, Marilyn, Robin, Jackie, Gabrielle, Aaron, Joshua, Michaela, Jonathan and Noah, Adam and Boaz, and dear friends and family, we have heard so much about this man who lived an incredibly full life as we remember him today. There's a story that when a person is born, all rejoice, but when he dies, like today, all weep. But it's written that it should not be so. But rather, when a person is born, there should be no rejoicing because no one knows what will happen in that man's life. When someone dies, however, there is cause for rejoicing if he departs with a good name and leaves the world in peace and with love. It's as if there were two ocean ships, one leaving the harbor and the other entering. As the one sailed out, everybody rejoiced on their voyage, but no one displayed any joy over the one that was returning. But a shrewd person who stood on the dock said, "I take the opposite view. There is no cause to rejoice over the ship leaving the harbor. No one knows what will happen to it, what seas, what storms it may encounter. But when it enters the harbor, we all have the opportunity to rejoice because we know that it has come home safely." Similarly, when a person dies, we find an opportunity for gratitude. We can offer thanks that that man departed from the world with a good name and in peace. And in some way, there are no words for how we're feeling today. It feels as though Marshall died so suddenly. But through our grief and our shock and our sadness, we are thankful for the impact that Marshall has left on our world. Through his brilliant work as a law professor, and most importantly, with the love and compassion that he shared with each one of us, and the indelible mark that he has left on our lives. Marshall was born on October 1st, 1936 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to parents Mitchell and Norma of blessed memory. Several years later, he became a big brother to you, Ron, and you heard about the relationship that you grew over and over and over and strengthened throughout your life. He loved the Philadelphia Phillies. He was 10 when your family moved to Miami, Florida, where you heard about the amazing student he was. He became the editor of his school newspaper, and you have to all know that he wrote a column called I Shapo's, which I bring up because it's easy to think of him as being a very serious man, as he clearly was, but there was also this sense of humor that you all got to see and witness. And what you talked about is that when he became a grandfather to all of you, all of a sudden a silliness was exposed within him that you never really knew. We've heard a lot about Marshall, but he also got into Harvard as an undergrad, but he didn't go because his father had died suddenly and his mom asked him to stay. And what's remarkable about that story that you shared is that he never, ever showed regret. He knew what he needed to do, and whenever he did anything, he always did it with a smile and with giving 110% that he did all the time. So we went to the University of Miami, where he began to study law, and he became the editor of the school newspaper. And one day, visiting from her own college, a young woman walked into the school newspaper office, and there was Marshall Shapo. And they inquired about each other, and Marshall asked you, Helene, out. And you began 65 years of an incredibly loving relationship. After graduating, Marshall was offered a position teaching at the University of Miami before he began law school there, where he graduated, of course, #1 in his class. He wrote for the Law Review, and what was special is that you were both writing for the Law Review, Ron, at the very same time because he had taken some time off. In Miami and then eventually in Austin, he had 2 wonderful sons, Nat and Ben, who you heard of how much he loved the both of you. Marshall co-authored his first text law book as a young man on tort, and he continued to teach, write, learn, study, and of course find some special time to be with you as a family. You remember your dad as being smart and earnest and serious. He was a workaholic, as you've mentioned, but he always made time for you. You always knew that whenever you needed him, he was there, and that is a very special gift that he not only gave to you, but that you give to your family as well. You moved to Charlottesville, where, Helene, you got your own law degree, and eventually you came and settled here in Evanston, where you lived for many years together. You can go on Northwestern's website, where you'll find a long biography of the page after page after page of the articles and the textbooks and the books that Marshall wrote and co-authored that have left an important mark in our world of law, which is beyond my understanding. But just notably, he published a book on compensation for victims of terror in 2005, which you were proud that became an essential guide to those who are dealing with the compensation for the victims of the 9/11 terror attack. I mentioned that this new side of Marshall was revealed when he became a grandfather to you all. And he loved being a grandfather, and I hope that you always remember his playful, silly side that he got to spend with you. He was so proud of you as your parents spoke. Noah, you spoke about growing up so close to your grandfather that he would keep box scores at every one of your baseball games, and he would write stories about them. You learned how to write and speak because you played boggle with your grandfather, who never let you win. But you were always just fascinated with him, and he always had a book in his hand, mostly nonfiction. Aaron, you mentioned that your papa taught you to think critically, and you all remember the calm down tests, which I don't know if he subjected anybody else to. And he would approach you from behind, start massaging your shoulders, and if you flinched, he would say, "Not calm." But of course, you thought that he would never have liked to be a victim of that game, because he didn't like surprises. So every morning he ate Cheerios with banana cut up before he would go on his morning run. He said he had many pairs of New Balance on hand, including in some boxes, and he would write the dates down so he could keep track of them. Josh, you spoke about the fact that you were amazed to really understand that he was 87, because only 10 years ago he was playing basketball with you as though he was in his 40s or 50s, and to think that he was 75, 76 at the time was really remarkable, because he always took care of himself as he was studying and learning and parenting and grandparenting. Unfortunately, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's that eventually caused him and forced him to slow down, which was very hard on him. Nat, I know that he knows how much you cared for him and how essential you were to providing that care for him over the last many years, and we are all grateful for that as well. When your dad went to the hospital last week, when your grandfather, when your friend, we couldn't imagine that we would be sitting here today. But we are grateful that his passing came quickly and that he did not suffer, and that ultimately he is now at peace. Today we are marking the return of a great ship to its harbor. We're of course saddened by the journey's end, but we can be comforted with the knowledge that his voyage was filled with love, with caring, and fulfillment, and that he left a very indelible mark on our world. So for all that was good in his life, we offer our gratitude. We say, Zichrono Livracha, may Marshall Shapo's memory be for an eternal blessing. And together we say, Amen. We take one more moment for our own silent remembrances. The poet writes, "When I die, give what's left of me away to children and old men that wait to die. And if you need to cry, cry for your brother walking the street beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around anyone and give them what you need to give to me. I want to leave you something better than words or sounds. Look for me in the people I've known and loved. And if you cannot give me away, at least let me live in your eyes and not in your mind. You can love me best by letting hands touch hands and by letting go of children that need to be free. Remember that love doesn't die, but people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away." We now rise as we are able for our recitation of Al Malei Rachamim, our prayer of mourning. El Malei Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hamsei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, Im Kedoshim Toharim, Kazohar Akira Mazirim, Et Nishmat Matidyahu ben Mikael, Shahalach Le'olamo, Bal harachamim yashtirehu beseter kenafav le'olamim V'yitzror b'yitzror ha'chayim et nishmato, Adonai hu nachalato, v'yanuach b'shalom ha'mishkavo, v'nomar, Amen. God of abundant mercy, God most high, may the soul of our loved one who has gone to eternity find the gift of perfect peace in your embrace with the holy and pure whose light shines like the radiance of heaven. Compassionate God, hold him close to you forever so that his soul may be bound up in the bond of life eternal. May he find a home with you and may he rest in peace. And together we say, Amen.
You can be seated for just a couple of announcements. This concludes the service here in the sanctuary. The family will be sitting Shiva today at the Michigan Shores Club that is located at 911 Michigan Avenue in Wilmette, and it'll be from 5 p.m. until 7 p.m. Tomorrow, the family will be sitting at the Shapo residence located at 804 Elmwood Avenue in Wilmette. The family also asks that any memorial contributions please be made to the American Parkinson's Disease Association. All of the Shiva details and memorial contributions are on the service folder that you received when you came into the sanctuary today. If you do not have one, we'll have them as you depart. It is also located on Marshall's funeral webpage at chicagojewishfunerals.com. The interment will take place today at Memorial Park Cemetery. If you will be joining us in procession, I will ask that you please obtain an orange funeral safety sticker and place that in the front passenger portion of your windshield. Please have your bright headlights and hazards on. And as an additional measure of safety, we will be placing some magnetic flags on top of vehicles in the procession. The procession will be lining up south, just in front of the synagogue here. While you're in procession, please stay as close to the car in front of you as safety permits. If the car in front of you does proceed through a red light, please use your horn liberally and proceed with caution. At this time, I will ask everyone to please rise as we escort Marshall's casket, family, and the rabbi from the sanctuary.